morning, everybody. I know I have to say something, but I don't know what I'm going to say, so I pray to God that He should put the right words into my mouth, and that I should say the right words. Yesterday, President Trump apparently said, I didn't hear it in context, and I don't know exactly what he said. But he expressed himself saying that he felt that Jewish people who vote Democrat are either extremely ignorant or have a great disloyalty. It's a troubling statement. I feel, at least on the national level, there's truth to it. Although there are other factors why someone would vote Democrat, particularly on the local election. And particularly in a visible Jewish community where the election of the Democrat would be inevitable anyway. I, in a sense, agree with the words that the president said, even though the way that many people are interpreting it, and I don't know the context, so I don't have context to interpret exactly what the president was saying. And the way it's being interpreted, I certainly don't agree with. But there is room to say that what he's saying is true. So that sounds complicated, so let me try to explain at least my feelings on the subject, and then we can move on from there. First, we have to know a little bit of the history of the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party is, to this very day, what it's always been. A party of two things: big government and, which maybe that it's not always been, but perhaps more importantly is identity politics. Identity politics means they want to put people into categories and groups as far as the electorate, because they are Democrats coming from demos, demographic. They're concerned with numbers. Thus, the Democrats seek to shore up demographics, voting blocks, coalitions, in order to amass, a majority of votes. That's the concept of democracy, and they seek to have America be essentially a democracy, which really democracy is mob rule. It's, if you have, two wolves and a lamb voting on what to eat for supper, and that's essentially what the Democrats are. But they seek to, again, view people as part of a group, as part of a demographic, so they can say, oh, we have the black vote, we have the women's vote, we have the gay vote, we have the Jewish vote, we have the Hispanic vote. That's the focus of the Democrats. That's all they care about. So essentially, in that manner, at least, although I think there's really more to it, but at the very least, we all have to admit that nothing really has changed much in that view of the voter, the view of society, of the Democrat Party, that black people are a group, Jewish people are a group, women are a group, members of the homosexual communities are a group, Hispanics are a group, Asians are a group, Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, these are groups that the Democrat Party seeks to have essentially a voting bloc that they can depend on the black vote. They can depend on the gay vote. They can depend, on the Jewish vote. They can depend on the women's vote. And, you might break that down into demographics of suburban women, urban women, things like that. Women of various, to the point where, they're discussing in their debates that, who's focusing on the, I don't want to hit those birds. Those are big quails. I think there's a quail farm around here, but the quail farm is further down. That's what it is driving in a rural area. I'm pretty sure those were farm quails. I don't think they were wild quails. But I didn't hit them, so that's good. This fog is indeterminable here. Baruch Hashem, I was able to stop and not turn. So anyway, and that's pretty much, and so the racially charged past of the Democratic Party, where they were focused on actively, discriminating against people based on race, and that is the history of the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party was the party of slavery and Jim Crow, and to a certain extent, that ideology remains in the Democrat Party in the sense of saying that they view members of these groups not as individuals, but as members of the groups first and foremost. To a certain extent, Donald Trump has that view because he used to be a Democrat. And so there's still this vestigial Democrat ideology in Donald Trump's mindset. But much less so. I think he's learned to a certain extent that it's not exactly so, but it's still there in his mindset. Now I'm stuck behind this stinky truck. So I know Donald Trump said he likes trucks. His mother told him when he was 4 years old, "Donald, you like trucks." I can take or leave trucks personally. But anyway, so here we have this dilemma of these words that Donald Trump said and how to view them. Now, essentially, the Republican Party is the party of Lincoln, the party of individual freedoms. That's why they're called Republicans, because the republic means that it's not a monarchy, essentially. And a democracy can often be defined more or less as the mob rule, whereas a republic ideally should be protecting the rights of the individual and the minority. And as we've said before, the most important minority is the minority of one. And that's essentially the Republican ideology. And that's the major difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. Democrats see groups, and Republicans see individuals. And so that's why the Republicans will appeal not to say so much we're looking for the black vote as that we're looking for the vote of individual people, including individual blacks. Not that they're looking for the gay vote, but the vote of the individual members of these homosexual communities, things like this. Can I get around this truck? Is there... I think I can make it. It's a little scary with this fog, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do, right? So anyway, take some risks, I mean, you guys can see this fog. Look, I don't usually look at the camera, but like, whoa, there's nothing to see out there. There's nothing to see here, right? This guy, he's driving, doesn't even have his lights on. All right. So, to a certain extent, this statement that Donald Trump made was from a Democrat ideology, and there is certain aspects of this, because what Donald Trump has done, first of all, he's not really a traditional Republican. He's essentially, melded the two, really, if anything, and that was why, I was very uncomfortable with Donald Trump as the candidate, but I voted for him. Not that my vote would really matter in New York. Hillary was going to win New York anyway, most likely, as she apparently did. I don't know if she actually did or not, because but at least on paper she did. Although, I think New York could be in play this time around. Now the fog is lifted. But Donald Trump, having been a Democrat in the past not too long ago, and having a lot of the, especially cultural aspects of the Democrat ideology, the only really major, social issue that he's really taken a conservative stance on is abortion. He's very liberal in his views on the homosexuality, as many people on the American right have become recently. Which makes a lot of us uncomfortable, to be honest. I mean, there was, what's his name, Charlie Kirk, tweeting about, the difference between the Palestinians and the Israelis on the LGBTQ issues. All right, so these are things to consider here. And a lot of people, and to a certain extent, I would venture to say that, that's part of the issue, and traditionally and historically has been part of the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, has been on these social issues, meaning, traditional Muslims in the Holy Land area, who for the past 50 or so years have been calling themselves Palestinians. They never called themselves that before. But these people are upset at the debauchery that the secular Israelis have brought to the Holy Land, as the religious Jews are upset about it. And it's not only the homosexual issues. Islam certainly is against gambling. Judaism isn't supportive of gambling. It certainly frowns upon gambling, but it doesn't really see it necessarily as sin. It sees it as potential sin. Certainly frowns upon gambling. Doesn't outright prohibit gambling. Depends on the situation. But the casinos, in particularly, like, I think in Jericho, which has a high Muslim population, and this is an old story, and these types of things that more religious Muslims are upset that the Israelis are bringing these types of secular culture into their community, and rightfully so. And yet, President Trump has been very, very much pro-gay, probably the most pro-gay president ever, and yet he's still accused of homophobia. Whereas, he's fighting to eliminate, to decriminalize homosexuality throughout the world, things like that. Which again, it's difficult. How do we deal with this particularly? As people who are Bible believers, but it is what it is. Part of it is just that it's an issue of reality, and it seems it's pretty much more or less what the world, is pointing to, and things like that. To a certain extent, you can't fight City Hall. That type of an attitude, pretty much, is what we're looking at here. The history of the Democrat Party, though, again, it's a party of slavery, party of Jim Crow. The Jim Crow laws inspired the Nazis to a certain extent, to where the Nazis felt it went too far, and their approach to racism was much less than the Democrats' approach. A lot of people want to claim that, they changed this and that, but that's a lie. I mean, it's a lie that's been repeated enough, and the Democrats perhaps learned that from the Nazis. If you repeat a lie enough, it goes back to LBJ, who was an avowed racist, accusing Barry Goldwater of some kind of ties to the KKK, when it was the exact opposite. Barry Goldwater, he had nothing to do with the KKK. He disavowed the KKK. I believe that the support that KKK members claim to give to Barry Goldwater was, for the most part, for the sake of discrediting him more than anything. So, there's a lot what to talk about there. So, and it's the same thing to this day. It came out that the KKK was actually supporting Hillary, but they were pretending to a certain extent to support Donald Trump, when Donald Trump has nothing to do with it. Hillary and the Clintons have had long-standing connections to the KKK, and this comes to essentially the issues at hand here. Now, a lot of people are interpreting that Donald Trump is saying that by voting for Democrats, Jews are disloyal to Israel. So I'm an American. I'm not Israeli. I have no loyalty to Israel. I have religious devotion to the Holy Land, and that religious devotion has no difference as to who is running the Holy Land, whether it be the Ottomans, the British, or the Zionists. It's all, the Holy Land remains the Holy Land forever. And all it means is that there are certain laws that apply to that land that don't apply to other lands. That's pretty much, in a nutshell, what the Talmud says. about the Holy Land. There are these emotional expressions of love to the Holy Land, of kissing the ground and things that are mentioned in the Talmud, not in a legal sense, but more or less in a moralistic sense. What we could almost call folklore sense. But the main issues of the Holy Land are that this is the land where you take the Omer, the barley offering on the second day of Passover, the Shtei Alechem, the 2 loaves of bread on Pentecost, the Bikurim, the first fruits, which you don't bring those offerings. Today we don't bring them at all because we don't have a temple. But in the times of the ancient temple, and perhaps at some point in the future, not perhaps, we believe it will come, at some point in the future, when it's restored, then these laws will be restored. But at this point, there's really nothing to do with that. That's basically it. That's what the Mishnah says, and that's what the Holy Land is. And then Jerusalem is holier because you can eat the second tithes, which you can't eat in other cities, and so forth. And these are essentially, and then the various parts of the Temple Mount, the temple. It's a legalistic definition. That's all it is. Not a political one, but a legal definition from, our canon law, which we call halacha, or the Sephardic pronunciation halacha. And that's it. That's what the Holy Land is. And again, the Holy Land is the Holy Land, whether it's the Malamuks or the Ottomans, whoever it is, that's what it is. I would like to see, Donald Trump is talking about annexing Greenland. I would like to see him annex the Holy Land. That would solve a lot of the issues there. And essentially, a lot of the pious ultra-Orthodox Jews have a view that we're supposed to wait for the Messiah. We're not supposed to be building the temple right now. We're not supposed to be establishing a commonwealth at this point. There are statements in the Talmud which will say that the Messiah will not come until there is no government, Jewish government in Israel. And that it's actually preventing, it's one way of interpreting that passage, and it makes sense, that essentially we're supposed to wait for the Messiah to come and not set up the Israeli government. And as long as the Israeli government exists, the Messiah cannot come. And so, and I know, of course, Donald Trump is influenced by his children who are otherwise pious Jews, essentially, but they are taught the way they are taught. There's not one official, canon understanding of that, but it's interpreted in certain very pious communities to essentially, not be anything to do with, that a pious Jew should not be supporting the state of Israel, and that it's a disloyalty to God to support the state of Israel. And the canard that's often stated of dual loyalty, it's very problematic, and it upsets me. One of the few things that upset me about President Trump is when he makes these types of statements, where he'll be addressing Jewish audiences, and he'll say something like, your prime minister, in reference to Benjamin Netanyahu, and no, I don't have a prime minister. I'm an American. We don't have prime ministers in America. I have a president, and you, Mr. Trump, are my president. and I have absolutely nothing to do with Benjamin Netanyahu any more than I have to do with, if I would have had to do with the Ottomans, before World War I, because they happened to be the ones who were in charge of the Holy Land at that time. However, as I've described, the Democrat Party is definitely a very problematic party for any American to support. I mean, this was the party that fought a civil war against us, against this union, against this country, and they're still seeking to divide the country just as much as they did in the 1850s and 1860s. Very little has changed. Maybe the expressions of it have changed, but the underlying ideology remains absolutely the same. And I think we have to recognize that, as I've described. Now, what's the difference between with these issues that we've discussed about moral issues, family values issues, that it would seem on the outset that Donald Trump and the Democrats are the same, but they're still different. And this is a reason why I think we have to make, we should not be supporting Democrats as Jews. Forget about Israel, forget about Zionism, because we're Americans. But as Jews, we have to, and Judaism is a religion, not a race, and we have a lot of heretics who call themselves Jews. The vast majority of people who call themselves Jews are not Jews, they're heretics. They're not Gentiles, but they're in the category which in Halacha we call Yisrael Mumar. They're apostates, which means they're obligated in Jewish law as Jews, but they do not share any of the benefits or privileges of the Jewish community. Meaning, if they touch wine that's not mevushal, the wine is yayin nesef, it's not kosher. Just like if an idolater would touch wine, so too these people, even though they might have Jewish ancestry, they might be what people would call racially Jewish, whatever that means. That doesn't matter. What matters is, are they pious Jews? And so in that sense, and I've said before, people will say, oh, it's anti-Semitic to criticize George Soros or the Rothschild bankers or this and that. I think a lot of the conspiracy theories about the Rothschild bankers are, hyperbole, ignorance, but it's not anti-Semitic. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I don't believe in this concept of Semitism and anti-Semitism. These are Nazi ideologies of identifying people as Jewish racially. That's not what the traditional view ever was. And even though I might disagree with the Kushners about Zionism, but they're essentially Orthodox Jews, even if they might be somewhat liberal in their approach to Orthodox Judaism, they're not kofrim, they're not heretics, they're not apostates. And Ivanka Trump as a convert is more Jewish than an apostate, an atheist, a heretic like George Soros. And I don't believe a lot of the Rothschilds are even actually Jewish anymore. Obviously there are pious Orthodox Jews with the last name Rothschild, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about particularly the bankers that there are all these conspiracy theories about. Even a lot, and I think some of these conspiracy theories are true and some of them are false. I think the main thing that's false is their worth. They don't have that much money the way it's said. But that's neither here nor there. A lot of these people who talk about the Rothschilds, this and that, aren't even aware that they're Jewish. It doesn't really sound, when you say it more in the Yiddish or German, Rothschild, something like that, then it sounds more Jewish sounding. But the Rothschild doesn't really particularly sound Jewish. So a lot of people are, even though there's no such thing as like a Jewish name, there are plenty of Jewish people don't have Jewish names. I mean, I remember Stephen Hill, and he had more like a Polish Jewish name, like Kasizowski or something like that, and I don't remember what it was, but close to Kolakowski or something. But he changed it to Hill, and now his grandchildren, in Square Cheder in Yerushalayim, Heyud Lamed, they'll have the name Hill, because the grandfather changed the name in Hollywood. Sefrona Levracha. I remember meeting him. I was close with his children. So anyway, let's get back to a little bit more what we were discussing here. So I do believe that, particularly on the national level, to vote Democrat is problematic for the religious Jew, because the difference between Donald Trump seeking to give civil rights to people who practice homosexuality, from the government level and so forth, we're not seeking to impose, religious standards on America necessarily. It's troublesome, the redefinition of marriage, but it's happened already, and it's probably not going to change anytime soon. I particularly don't like the way it happened by the Supreme Court. That's what it is, and that's the consequence of electing someone like Barack Obama twice. The difference is that the Democrats view people who have a sincerely held religious belief as bigots. And I've said it before, my belief is, particularly that we speak of orthodoxy rather than orthopraxy. A person who perhaps struggles with homosexuality and might even engage in homosexual acts from a religious standpoint, but feels bad about it and is constantly, repenting and trying to stop and trying to control themselves, but recognizes that it's wrong, and they'll klap al chet on Yom Kippur, right? That's one, they're a sinner like any other sinner, and every person's a sinner. But the person who believes there's nothing wrong with it, even if they don't engage, they have no interest in engaging in such acts, but they believe that it's not sin, is a heretic, and that's much worse from a religious standpoint. I'm not talking about from a government standpoint here. And but the Democrats would view that ideology as bigoted. This idea that a particular act might be sinful, they view that as bigoted. And I think that's much more of a problem for a religious person. and many other issues, meaning the issues that the Democrats hate about the Christian community are all rooted in Judaism. They're all, from our Torah, from Leviticus, from, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It can be rooted in Genesis. That's what, the Democrats hate, I mean, it's not as much, necessarily like, the teachings of Jesus. A lot of those, not all of them, but a lot of them will sound and certainly to be interpreted to be very liberal. And so essentially the attacks that the left have against Christianity are attacks against Judaism. Now you're going to say, well, 80% of Jews vote Democrat, but 80% of Jews aren't religious. Or they're certainly not Orthodox. They might be religious, but their religious expression is different. And that's essentially, what we're dealing with here. So what else can we talk about here? So I don't believe that the Israel issue is really what makes Jews ignorant or disloyal, but the other issues. Now we come to the question, so why do so many religious Jews, at least in local elections, support Democrats? And that answer, it's a sad truth of our exile, and that is, in particularly Jews who live in New York and New Jersey, the Democrats are going to win anyway. And when the Jewish communities live in very visible voting blocks, and you can see these areas who they're voting for, they're going to vote Republican for president. They voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump, to the point where a lot of secular Jews will be like, when they, or other left wingers, when they want to discriminate against Hasidic Jews, they're going to call them Trump voters. And that's really the Judeophobia, what colloquially call anti-Semitism. I don't like that term, but that's what they're going to say. Oh, those Trump voters, in reference to Hasidic Jews, who a lot of them are not pro. I'm not going to say not pro-Israel, but they're not. What do we call it? They're not Zionists, whether they're anti-Zionists or non-Zionists. They could perhaps, the way I generally approach Israel would say that it's an American ally, and that's why I view Israel the way I view England or Japan or something like that. In addition to the Holy Land aspect. But, as an American, if for some reason Israel and America would go to war, God forbid, I would most likely be supporting America. Unless something radically changed, which I don't see happening, I'd either be supporting America or be neutral, but I would not be supporting Israel. These are aspects of what to discuss with this issue. So I'm at work. It's time for me to close up shop here. But the thing is, so if communities that are very clearly Orthodox Jewish communities don't vote for whoever's going to win anyway, they're just setting themselves up for being persecuted by those Democrats who are going to win anyway. That's really what the story is there. So But on the national level, they're going to vote Republican generally because they share more of the Republican values, even if they don't agree with the Republicans necessarily about Israel. And then also a lot of people, even if they oppose Zionism, see it that whether it's true or not, and I don't think it's necessarily true, but a lot of people will say that a person who's not aware of what the Talmud says and they oppose Israel might very well be anti-Semitic, whatever that means, and a lot of that, there's issues with that. All right, I haven't really said anything. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you all later.